Well, I'll get underway with the piece from the Jersey Forestry Association, and then Andy, you'll take the helm and do the introductions. So tonight's presentation is Farmland Assessment of Woodlands, and Farmland Assessment of Woodlands, in our view, means healthy woodlands. So we'll learn a little bit more about that from the experts, including Kristen, Jeremy, and Andy. So I just wanted to thank the New Jersey Forest Service and Forest Fire Service for supporting us in our most recent Walk in the Woods event. It was super, super excellent. It was down at Bass River Forest, and we got to see a huge amount of work that was all integrated from different projects to produce healthier forests, public safety, prevention and suppression of fires. And it was just a wonderful day. So I sincerely thank all the folks who participated. It was absolutely outstanding. Save the date, third Thursday of the month. We have one every single month, third Thursday, coming up, estate planning for forest and farmland owners. We haven't done this before, but there's a lot of questions going on. And you'll see in this slide that's up now, the average age of woodland owner in New Jersey is 65, and 25% of woodlands are under the management of persons 75 or older, which is a very significant increasing age shift that we have in land ownership. And so this upcoming BYF is really important for that community. And if you miss any of our presentations live, you can always go to our YouTube page. They get posted within a week or so of the completion of the BYF. And last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to join the association. We do a lot of great things, not just presentations, but also in representing landowners and the future of the forests of New Jersey. So please support us with membership, donations, anything you could do, attend our events. We much appreciate it. And presenter introductions. Andy, there's a little slide for you to work from if you like.
Cool. Thank you very much. So you're good, Rich. That's it?
I'm good. Should I kill the share, or are you good?
Yeah, you can kill the share. That's fine.
Okay. Done.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you much. Well, good evening, folks. My name is Andy Bennett. I'm a consulting forester, but also a director here at the association. Rich, thanks for the intro, and thanks everybody for being on the call. We do these backyard forestry things for you. So we're grateful you're here, and we're hopeful that we'll impart some information to you. By all means, if you have questions tonight, we are going to have lots of time at the back end. So hopefully tonight will be a good conversation, be helpful, and we'll answer your questions. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you a quick summary of kind of where we're going and how this is going to shake out. So at the beginning, I'm going to speak on farm assessment and forests, and then I'll be followed by our two guests. We have Jeremy Caggiano from the Forest Service, and we have Kristen Umansky, who's a local assessor. As we're presenting, I want to encourage you to be thinking of any questions you might have or any clarifications you might need from us. And I would ask you to use the question and answer function. So if you're on Zoom, down at the bottom, I think it's like, I don't know where it is, but anyway, down at the bottom, it says Q&A. If you just click on Q&A, that's where you can type in a question. Okay, I think you got to go to Q&A, and then up in the upper right-hand corner, well, I'm not really sure how to use it, but anyway, hopefully we'll figure it out. Maybe.
And if you get stuck, you can always use the chat.
Yeah, there we go. So anyway, so plug in your questions there. Rich and I will be kind of monitoring those so that we have those questions ready for the tail end of the meeting where we'll address the questions. If that fails, we may go to the old, raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can ask your question. But the goal is to be wrapped up with presenting by probably 7:30, 7:35, giving us probably 45 minutes to almost an hour of just Q&A at the tail end. So that is where we're going. And with that, I'm going to get started. So let me share my screen. I have a real basic PowerPoint ready here. Let's see if we can get this thing going. From the beginning, display, swap presenter. Okay, are we seeing that?
Yes.
All right, cool. Okay, so one of the core values of the New Jersey Forestry Association is to promote and encourage the responsible and active stewardship of New Jersey's forests, both public and private. Some of you may know this, but 40%, about 40% of New Jersey's land mass is forested, which is about 1.8 million acres. And of those 1.8 million acres, about 1 million is privately owned, which leaves 800,000 acres that is approximately owned by the state or a nonprofit, township, county, etc. And when it comes to publicly owned land, we know that the vast majority, I'm just estimating, probably 95% of this land is not really actively stewarded, actively managed. These acres are typically just preserved and protected from development. And we're all obviously really grateful and thankful that we have these forests that are preserved and protected from development. But unfortunately, most of these acres are sometimes neglected, leaving lots of forested acres in a state of vulnerability and risk. So I'm not here tonight to really argue about the need for active stewardship, active management on public lands, but I think it is helpful to at least note the amount of stressors or pressures that are being placed on our forests today. So things like bugs and pests. So we know about recently here, actually this year, we had a pretty bad outbreak of gypsy moth or spongy moth. We also know about emerald ash borer, obviously. We also have diseases that are stressing our forests. So we have a newer one called beech leaf disease, which may kind of spell the end of beech as we know it. Our forests are also dealing with warmer temperatures, heavier rains, strong winds, development and fragmentation, leaving a lot of our public forests in need, desperate need of help, okay? But on the flip side, we have this 1 million acres of privately owned forested land. Many of these forested acres are farm assessed. And of these farm assessed acres, a majority of them are being managed and stewarded under a DEP approved forestry plan. So this means that thousands or really tens of thousands of forested acres are not only being protected from development through farmland assessment, but they're also being actively stewarded and tended to or cared for rather than neglected. And so this is why we titled the talk, Farmland Assessment Equals Healthy Forests. We're trying to kind of tie a string or draw a line, if you will, from farmland assessment to our forests being much healthier or more resilient. And really, I think there's actually a direct connection. So every year, or at least multiple times a year, there's someone or a group of folks or a politician who tries to downplay the value and significance of farmland assessment. Recently, we've seen farm assessment targeted by a proposal to increase the rollback penalty to 10 years rather than the current 2-year consequence. Additionally, we've had folks want to increase the minimum income requirement. And almost guaranteed every year, there's somebody claiming that farm assessment is a tax loophole for the rich, or these are just fake farmers, right? We've heard that. We hear that every single year, probably multiple times a year. And while there's many things to say about this, I just want to land the plane for a minute and talk about some of the mostly unspoken values that a properly stewarded forest provides for the local township or the county or really the entire state. So healthy and resilient forests they provide a lot of benefits, a lot of values, and I just want to kind of cover a few of those. So healthy and resilient forests help to filter water so that we have clean drinking water. They also take in carbon dioxide and give us clean air to breathe. Additionally, these forests sequester and store carbon, helping to offset man-made emissions. At the same time, forests provide habitat for a broad range of species. So they're encouraging biodiversity that we have here in New Jersey. And what about recreation? So forests provide a place to hike and run and bike and hunt and fish and camp. and just recreate in general. And we have forest products. So we have, wood is used to build furniture, for cabinets, toothpicks, paper products, and so on. We also get from our forest maple syrup or certain mushrooms. Also, our forests provide opportunities for farmers to raise certain livestock more naturally, like pigs or goats. And I think the most amazing part of it all is forests do all of these things at the same time, which is pretty cool. I can't do two things at once, let alone, the 5, 6, 7 things we've mentioned here about forest. So, and I think, farm assessment, in a sense, makes this happen. Landowners are given an incentive. If they'll responsibly steward and tend to their forests, they'll save a little money on the taxes associated with their land. So the next time,
Hey, Andy,
yeah.
Can I just jump in 1 second?
Yeah.
Just to follow up on your point and clarify to the audience, because everyone is not necessarily a forest landowner in the audience.
Yeah.
Farmland assessment doesn't apply to the home, does it?
Mm-mm.
So it only relates to undeveloped land, in essence.
Yeah.
In this case, is in the form of a forest.
Yep.
The home is fully assessed and fully taxed, correct?
Yep. That would be the argument that's why it's not a tax loophole for the rich. We're not talking about savings.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone. Thanks a lot, Andy.
Correct. Yep. So farm assessment helps make this happen. And so my encouragement for you would be, the next time you hear somebody kind of poo-pooing the idea of farmland assessment, maybe take a moment to explain to them the great value of the program and tell them about all the many benefits they're receiving because landowners are being encouraged to actively steward their forests. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now and we're going to get ready to move. Okay. We good? There we go. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a moment again to introduce our speakers here, our guests. So we have Jeremy Caggiano from the New Jersey Forest Service. Jeremy is based out of the Andover office in the north region of the state. If you own land in Sussex or Warren or Passaic or Morris or anywhere kind of in the north, you've probably run into Jeremy at some point, maybe on an inspection or spoken to him on the phone. At a minimum, he's probably reviewed, if you're a forested landowner and you have a forestry plan, he probably reviewed and approved the plan that's in place on your property. Second, we have Kristen Umansky, who's a local assessor. She handles the assessor duties in Vernon and Frieden, and I might be missing a little township. I just can't remember. She can fill us in on that. But anyway, Jeremy, Kristen, thanks so much for volunteering your time and sacrificing, giving up your evening to serve us. So we really appreciate that. And so I've kind of asked them to give us maybe like a 30,000-foot view, 3 to 5 minute kind of summary of their role in kind of the farm assessment world, kind of what they do, how they contribute, and also maybe just any typical questions or issues that come across their desk in relation to farmland assessment. So I'll turn it over to Jeremy first and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy, for the introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. Give you like a brief overview of what New Jersey Forest Service's role is with regards to the farmland assessment process and the development of your plans that are required for farmland assessment. So a lot of people may know this already, but this all kind of began. Farmland assessment has been around for a really long time in New Jersey. But really the forestry side of things began with the Beck Bill. It was a bill introduced back in 1986, and it added to existing traditional agricultural landowners to be now, in addition to them, you would be able to incorporate woodlands into being capable of receiving a property tax abatement through farmland assessment. So back in 86, there was not as many woodland owners that were coming into the program. It was relatively manageable by the New Jersey Forest Service. People in my role then would have been considered service foresters, and we were going as far as doing what the consultant foresters are presently services they're providing to their clientele base. So everybody that was farmland assessed through their woodlands back in '86 and for years after that, we're having management plans developed by New Jersey Forest Service, state foresters. And then those plans would go through the process of being submitted to municipal assessors like Kristen, statewide, and being implemented by the landowner. So the nuts and bolts of the process that the landowners have to incur to remain farmland assessment has remained unchanged, but a huge change has occurred over the decades since then. More and more people have found their way into the programs. And we're at the point where right now statewide, we have about 7,200 woodland owners that have either a woodland management plan or a forest stewardship plan. That's statewide. The bulk of those people are in the northern third of the state. In the northern third, we have about 4,100 woodland owners, either with a forest stewardship plan or a woodland management plan. Now, both of those plan types obviously will qualify a woodland owner for farmland assessment or that tax break. You could either, either forest stewardship or woodland management. As of 2017, December 18, 2017, owners had the option of pursuing a relatively new program. It is the new forest stewardship program. It's slightly different. It's more robust in the plan development. A more broad array of objectives could be incorporated into the plan itself. And I would say that the biggest difference, and I think it's a great difference, a much needed difference for farmland assessment, is that under a stewardship plan, woodland owners don't necessarily have to derive income off of properties that aren't entirely comprised of woodlands. So sometimes, especially for smaller woodland owners, properties could incur the management that the forest genuinely needs. They could focus on things like the removal of non-native invasive species. Some of the major culprits are Japanese barberry, multiflora rose, autumn olive, Russian olive. Many of these species I'm sure you guys have already encountered on your own properties, whether you are woodland owners or not. But essentially, to qualify for one of those types to be farmland assessed, you need to have at least 5 acres. That 5 acres, I'm sure Kristen will get more into it, could come in the form of mixed use properties. So it could be a combination of traditional agriculture or woodland. I'm going to focus on the woodland now. However, to develop a forest stewardship plan and have that plan be approvable in New Jersey, woodland owners need to have at least 5 contiguous acres of forest. The stands need to be at least, to be considered a stand, to be incorporated to meet that minimum threshold of 5 acres, you need to have at least half-acre stand sizes. The property, as I mentioned, needs to be contiguous. It needs to be accessible so that the property could be managed throughout the 10-year plan term and beyond. And there are a few other criteria, obviously, that would be required before you even get into the plan development process. But essentially, those are the 2 different plans that would be provided or could be provided to the New Jersey Forest Service from one of the consultant foresters, a consultant forester of your choice. Those plans come to my office or come to the other region's offices. They get reviewed by the Forest Service. Upon approval, those plans should be getting implemented. And every plan, whether it be a stewardship or a woodland management, it is a 10-year plan. And in every plan, there is an activity schedule that in brevity outlines exactly what the expectation is in terms of management on an annual basis, year by year. And those management schedules are really, they're derived from the objectives that the landowner has for the course of the next 10 years on their property that are discussed with their foresters at, prior to the inventory or after the inventory is completed and before the plan is done and in the woodland owner's hands. So really, we want these plans to be driven by the sustainable long-term objectives of the owners themselves. And the consultant foresters have every capability to help with that process. So not only do the plans help landowners qualify for farmland assessment if they're woodland owners, they also provide things like exemptions to the Flood Hazard Area Control Act. Woodland owners with an approved plan have something that's called a permit by Rule 26. That permit by rule allows landowners to work in areas of regulated hydrology so long as those prescriptions are actually in the approved plan. So you can't just go out there willy-nilly and do whatever you want in an area of regulated hydrology It would have to be a responsible activity prescribed in the plan and approved by the state. So that's another benefit. But that, I think, just as a little background to what the state is doing in terms of plan review, that pretty much sums it up. And obviously, before every August 1st, similar to the assessor, the Forest Service also receives woodland owners' farmland assessment applications. We mostly focus on the farmland assessment form, the FA1 form, the woodland data form, as well as the activity map. So we review those applications. We make sure that from our perspective, they're sufficient. However, at the end of the day, the application's jurisdiction belongs to the assessor. So even if the Forest Service says, hey, your application looks good, that the assessor in your municipality makes that final determination. The last thing we do, and many of you have likely met me in the field, is that we try to once every 3 or so years, get out to each individual property and conduct an inspection. During the inspection, we do basically 3 major things. We make sure you still have a plan on file that hasn't expired. We make sure that, at least from the Forest Service's perspective, we're receiving your farmland assessment applications and they look sufficient. And most importantly, we will check in to make sure what's claimed on those forms, as well as what's prescribed by your consultant forester in the plan, matches what's actually happening in the woods. We make sure that there is enough management, the management prescribed is being completed, and we want to make sure of that because we want this program to be as fair as possible. We want everybody to have to put in the same amount of effort to qualify for this privilege of farmland assessment. And I know the moral as well as the theme of this evening, I think if those plans, whether it be a forest stewardship or a woodland management, if those plans are being adhered to and those activity schedules are being followed, I'm very confident that these forests are being left in a much better place than if they were left to benign neglect, if they weren't being treated responsibly and sustainably.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. I'm sure you'll get a lot of questions here in a little bit. So, Kristen, why don't you jump in and give us your view, and then we'll be on questions after that.
Thank you. My name is Kristen Umansky. As Andy said, I'm the assessor in Vernon. I saw a few people in chat were from Vernon. Also Frieden, and then I do have one property in Mountain Lakes that is under woodland management. So I have one there too. So basically my role in all of this is reviewing the application. I'm the final person that's going to look at it, or not just me, but any assessor. And we're going to either approve it or deny the application. I think it's really important to understand up front that all of our guidelines are derived from the Division of Taxation, and we just need to follow them. And that farmland assessment is actually at the end of the day, it's a privilege and it's not a right. So just having the woodland management plan or the forest stewardship plan actually is not enough to qualify. And I'll go over that briefly in a little bit, in like a minute or two. But how to qualify for farmland assessment is you have to have a minimum of 5 acres devoted to either woodlands or an agricultural use for 2 full calendar years before you can be approved. So if you're someone that's on tonight and you're new to all of this, you need to have your plan in place for a full 2 years, full 2 calendar years before you can receive the benefit of farmland assessment. The annual income requirements for a woodland property that's fully woodlands is $500 per year for the first 5 acres, an additional 50 cents per year for anything per acre for anything over 5 acres. And then if you have a mixed use property like hay or corn or whatever, then the minimum is a little higher. It's $1,000 per year, and then $5 additional per acre above that. And then, as Jeremy mentioned, for forest stewardship, there is no income requirement. The goal of that plan is really the health of the forest and not so much managing the trees and cutting down for firewood and that type of thing. You do need to have an approved woodland management plan or New Jersey forest stewardship plan in place Please, please, please make sure that those are not expired. I recently came across a property that had an expired plan for about a year and a half, and I had to deny the application because for whatever reason that slipped through the cracks. And that's not the conversation anyone wants to have with the landowner. Most important with your application is to make sure it's filed by August 1st. There is no exception to that unless you have a death in the immediate family or of the farmer themselves, or a sickness of the farmer. You can get an extension until September 1st, but you need to file an additional form for that. So you want to ask your tax assessor for that form, and it only gives you an extra month in order to file the application. It's okay to have an error on the application. It's okay for it maybe to accidentally have left a section blank. What's not okay is filing it late. Your tax assessor needs 2 fully executed copies of the FA1 application. We also need just one copy of the gross sales form, and we need 1 copy of your WD1 if you have a woodland property. If your property is 7 acres or less, we need a map of the property and a written narrative of how you're using the property. I request from all the property owners in the towns I'm the assessor in for proof of income. It's no longer required. However, if your assessor requests it of you, it is required. So just to make the whole approval process easier on you and your assessor, to eliminate questions that might come up, some sort of proof, either receipts or a previous year's tax return document are great, just as proof of income to help us in the approval process. And then really just a few things that have come up recently for me that have been interesting, and I thought I would bring up is even if you meet the land requirement with use and income, it is still possible to have your application denied. It's come up at least twice for me in the last 5 years of predominant use. So the intent of the law and the intent of farmland assessment is really to help someone who's really using the land strictly for farming or predominantly for farming. So having a woodland plan on, say, like a golf course or something, that's really, we're not trying to give a tax break to something that's really being used for a major business like that. It's really for land that's being devoted to the agricultural use or the woodland use. So you just want to keep that in mind. If you're thinking of doing something else on the property, talk it over with your tax assessor to see if that would have any impact on your farm assessment status, if there would be any rollback implications from it. You don't want to be surprised. So a lot of times it's probably okay, whatever you're planning to do, but just in case it's not, you want to have that conversation up front. The other thing I've come across is I mentioned that, we had the expired plan, and it's just not a situation anyone wants to be in. They didn't realize it was expired. The forester didn't realize it was expired. And then I noticed it in the application and had to deny them. So just be on top of it. Don't rely solely on other people to notice if your plan's expired or not. And then for mixed use properties, you want to make sure if you don't have a woodland plan or a stewardship plan in place that no more than 50% of your total acreage is woodlands. So if you have 10 acres of hay, you can't have more than 10 acres of woodlands without a plan. And that comes up a lot. So you just want to make sure no more than 50% of your total farm assessed acres is woodlands unless you have a plan in place. Now, Andy brought up rollbacks real quick. I will say, just to help everybody, and the rollbacks was very confusing to a lot of people. It does go back 2 years. However, the rollback is tied to the use of the land itself. So if you're no longer farm assessed, but you still have some activity, you should not be receiving any notice or bills for rollback. As long as the activity is still there, but it's just maybe not enough to qualify, a rollback should not be happening. So you want to ask your assessor about that if that does come up for you. That's all I've got.
Hi, Andy. Before we go to Q&A,
Yeah.
mind if I just share a little disclaimer statement?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
folks
Yep.
are, answering questions, so just take me a second to share. Did that come up, Andy?
Yes.
Okay. And so this is our disclaimer because we're going to be answering questions and we can't really tell what the facts are from a one sentence question or whose property it is or where the property is or what the property looks like or any of the real detailed facts. So what we're going to try to do is give as general an answer as possible. So please don't consider this any form of legal or tax advice and consult with your professionals to get that advice. So thanks, Andy, for that minute. I appreciate it.
Yep. Perfect. So I just, something Kristen said, I just wanted to follow up on. She said, talk to your tax assessor about X, some kind of issue or whatever it is. I would just encourage anybody who has property, get to know your tax assessor. You've heard from Kristen here. I can tell you that she's not scary. She's very kind. She's easy to talk to, as are pretty much any other assessor I've really dealt with. Is they're not unapproachable. They're very approachable. They're there to help you. They'll answer your questions. So I just think it's the best thing to do is to build a relationship with the assessor, so that when you have a question, it's not uncomfortable. Kristen will know who you are. I think, Kristen, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, I mean, it does help to know, like there's property owners in my towns that I have never spoken with before, and there's property owners in my town that I speak with every year. And those are the ones I know their farm or their land very well. And so when their application comes across my desk, I say, yep, that is exactly what's going on there, versus someone that doesn't have open communication with me, or even I reach out and they don't respond back. Then I have to start making guesses or assumptions. I'll go to the property, visit it. Sometimes I'm allowed on, sometimes they don't want me on. Oftentimes for Woodlands, I'll call Jeremy and I say, Jeremy, we need to get on this property because I'm not getting a full picture here just by looking at 3 sheets of paper. So I need a better look, and I'll have Jeremy come out with me and we'll go, embarrassing for me, hike through the property. And it's just always better to talk with your assessor. That way we know the properties, we know exactly what's going on. The more information you provide with your application, the better. And Mr. Platts is usually on these things. He provides the best narratives for his properties, and I know exactly what's going on at his properties at all times because he provides it to me.
I know who that is. I
Yeah.
know who that. I definitely know who that is. But I do have a question. Kristen, you said earlier something about 2 years of actively devoted to that use. So the question maybe somebody has in the audience is, I'm thinking of buying a property in New Jersey that's forested. If it already has a plan on it,
Yep.
and it's already in farmland assessment, can I just pick that up, or what do I have to do?
Yep, you can just continue right along with it. You want to make sure at closing you get a copy of the plan and contact with the forester. So the forester, all they need to do is then change the plan over to the new owner's name. And as long as the new owner continues from where the prior owner left off and continues to follow the plan, it's a seamless transition. That's true for all farmland, not just within property.
Right.
Where property was previously being hayed or corn or had animals grazing or whatever, as long as that activity continues somewhat seamlessly. We understand that, you're moving and all that kind of stuff, but as long as the effort's there, there's no reason for the farmland assessment to go away.
Okay, and then you file by August 1st.
August 1st. Not August 2nd.
Yeah.
August 1st.
Yes. All right.
Which I'd like to add to that a little bit too. I get those questions oftentimes by new landowners that are for lack of better terms, inheriting an existing plan. The plan term remains the same. It's a 10-year plan. No matter how many hands it passes through, the Forest Service just, in those cases, likes the landowner to look at the existing plan, see if that existing plan still kind of meets their objectives, because again, they're a new ownership. They may have different objectives for taking on their property in the long term. So look at what those prescriptions are, look at what the objectives are. If they seem to coincide with what you want long term for down your woodland, by all means, simply just have your consultant forester amend the cover page of that plan to reflect it being your ownership now as opposed to somebody else. And that will help kind of match up with the application in the subsequent filing season. In addition, I get questions very often from landowners in those transitions saying, hey, the previous landowner was working with Forester X. Well, I have a relationship with Forester Y. Can I switch? And the answer is absolutely. That new forester could work with the previous forester's plan and help you kind of with the implementation process of an existing forester's plan too. So I would say when you select a forester, whether there is a plan on the property already or you're brand new into the program, take your time, just like you're shopping for anything else. Go on the Forest Service's approved forester list. There's about 45 foresters to choose from. Make sure you're choosing somebody in relative close proximity to your woodland and take the time to interview the person because it's going to be a long-term relationship. As Kristen alluded to, and I mentioned before too, you're going to see your forester at minimum every single year when they help with the signing of your woodland data form. So make sure that relationship is smooth and you guys jive.
And I think it's also great. Another possible, I'm sorry, Andy, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you're a customer of mine and you're on this call, that doesn't apply actually. So you actually can't shop for another forester. I just want to make that clear. No, I'm kidding. If we stink, shop for another forester. Okay.
Well, the other thing is don't just go to the list. You can go to your neighbors. Up here, I'm up in the north, and I could just go down my block and, there's 5, 6 forest properties and ask them, who do you use? How's it been? Are they actively involved in your property? Are they responsive? Are they helping you administer your plan and put it into effect? And that's really the most help you can get in picking someone out, because sometimes just going to the list, you're just picking by address. It's difficult, but local references are phenomenal. And especially up here, up in the north, because there's just so many properties, and you get such good information from your neighbors.
And know what you need from the relationship with that forester, right? All the foresters provide a different set of services. Some really are there to help you with the development of the forest stewardship or woodland management plan, and they'll help you with the signing of the applications. And beyond that, you're kind of on your own. And others may help with those two, the plans and the applications, and help you select trees with tree marking paint, and then you're on your own. And then, there's a gamut of services, and some foresters do everything from A to Z. They'll help you with your application. They're going to help you with your plan. They're going to help you with the selection of your trees. They may even help you with the implementation of your annual activities that you need to conduct that are in line with your prescription. So make sure you know what you need from that relationship as you shop around too.
Good. Thank you. Well, we got some Q&A here. So let me start working down this list. Thank you for everybody who's putting some questions out here. So
there's one in the chat too.
Okay, cool. So Jeremy already covered one of these. What's the term of a typical plan? It's 10 years. There's no exceptions. It's a 10-year plan. That would be a woodland plan or a forest stewardship plan. It's 10 years. Here's kind of a question, Jeremy, for you. Maybe you can spitball. How many landowners have stewardship plans? So you got 7,200 properties. How many have stewardship plans? Got a guess?
I have a guess at this point, and it's increasing. I would say we're pretty darn close to a third have stewardship plans.
Okay.
That may not be necessarily true in the northern region, but there's less foresters in the southern region, less forestry firms, and the main couple of foresters in the south region of the state only prepare forest stewardship plans. So I would say approximately a third, maybe even more.
Wow.
Got it.
That's really grown, Jeremy. That's tremendous. The tremendous growth.
Here's one that I like this question because we get into this a lot. My house is on 7 acres. how do I figure out where my house stops and my forest starts? This sounds like a great question for Jeremy and Kristen, maybe.
Yeah.
Not for me, for you guys. Yeah.
You want to
So
take it
it's
first?
really, there's no like map, right? Not really. That's gonna, or at least no tax map anyway, that's gonna divide that out. It's still all one block and lot. And the assessment breakdown is really strictly an administrative function for billing purposes. So typically, and this is not the law, so actually very helpful for everyone on this call to realize that typically we resort to a 1 acre, what we call a home site of 1 acre, that's going to be assessed at full value, like everyone else in your neighborhood, along with the house. It doesn't have to be 1 acre. My property, for example, I have a 2 acre home site. And there's some that have half-acre home site. So in relation to woodlands, I would say your woodland plan is going to divide that out pretty clear in the plan itself. It'll say there's, 6 acres of woodlands, 1 acre that's not. Or they'll say there's 6.5 acres of woodlands and a half acre that's not. So the woodland plan really kind of tells the assessor what to assess, as well as an on-site visit just to be sure. But there's no real, for tax purposes, people always look to me, well, where's the acre on the tax map? Well, no, it's all one parcel. It's just being split into two billing line items as an administrative function so you have the benefit of lower taxes on the majority of your land.
And then from the Forest Service's perspective, the answer is relatively simple. Where the grass ends and the trees begin is where your woodland is.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit more nuanced than that, obviously. And like we mentioned before, these plans aren't set in stone. So you have these plans that could last for 10 years and things change on properties, obviously. We expect landowners that, perhaps they had 1 acre associated with the home site and there was a lawn and a pool and they had their patio and their grill out there. And as time goes on, maybe they lost a few ash trees. Maybe they saw it as being opportunistic. We could expand our home site footprint. We ask those landowners, please get in touch with your consultant foresters, be honest about your home site footprints and amend the plan accordingly. So if you once had 1 acre on year 1 of your plan and come year 6 of your plan, now you have 2 or 3 acres, you better amend the plan. And I say that because when I come out and do the inspection of the property, I'm going to be looking for that. If I saw, an increase in the home site footprint, it's only fair to everybody in the program and not in the program that area associated with the home site is taxed, for lack of better terms, ad valorem, right? And I know there's more nuance to that too. So really, keep your woodland intact. I recommend not expanding beyond that 1 acre footprint unless it's something you absolutely want. And obviously it's your property if you do want to do that. There's proper ways to do it, but the plans aren't set in stone. Amend your plan. And again, yeah, where the trees start and the lawn ends. And we don't want to see you with your lawnmower in the woodland either. So even if you have some trees and you have some perennial ryegrass, if you're mowing that grass and there's trees in the overstory, to me, that's not a forest.
Yep. Yeah, we Jeremy and I talk about this often, and I bring this up with customers, clients. Like we're regenerating a forest, so we want to have some type of future forest growing underneath our existing canopy trees, if you will. So if you're mowing, you don't have a future forest growing in the understory. But the nuance there, like Jeremy was saying, is you could have scattered trees beginning to grow, and you could be maybe brush hogging every other year to keep the invasive species kind of at bay. That's different than running through there with a lawnmower every other week and having grass growing there. So yeah, it's definitely nuanced. But yeah, good question. Great question. Thank you. This one's for Kristen. Hey, somebody is saying they haven't received their paperwork yet from the township. Is there a deadline when they should receive it? What's the rule of thumb there? I think, isn't it like July?
By end of June.
End
It
of June,
should be.
okay.
You should receive it by end of June. But if you're in one of my towns, I send them first week of May. So you should have it by now. But this is something that actually last year I ran into quite a bit where for whatever reason the post office didn't deliver it. You have to understand these are bulk mailing. So it's not like if you don't receive it and everyone else has received it, it's not intentional. It just got lost with the post office. But and then as you know, as just ask your assessor for a form. If you don't receive it, I would say by end of next week, I would just send your assessor an email. They'll email you a form. It's super easy for us to just get one out to you real quick. That way you have it in time and you're not scrambling. I denied several applications last year because they never received the form from me, and as a result, we're late. So but I think
Kristen,
end of
can't you
June,
get you can get the form on the
can print
state site,
it,
on
yeah.
the state site, they have a fillable form online.
Yeah.
You can
you
grab that
can
and use
literally
it.
type into Google New Jersey Farm Assessment FA1.
Yeah.
It's the first thing that pops
Yeah.
up.
Mhm.
You just
And-
make sure, yeah, don't wait too long. Just get on it and ask your assessor.
Yep. And keep in mind, just another thought is if you are not farm assessed, but you're in those qualifying years, you're not going to get paperwork from the tax assessor because you're not on their rolls as being a qualified farm yet. So if you're in that boat, you prep your application with your forester from, you know, the website or whatever. So it's not that hard. So okay, I like this one. I'm going to read this because I think this is helpful. Paul, thanks for being so thorough. This is a good one. So I fall into that average age forest landowner at 67. I have to admit it's getting harder for me to keep up with my plan. In addition, it gets frustrating. I'm getting older and so is my little Kubota. I have no help or resources to pay for help if the opposition is ever successful in making the demands and qualifications any more difficult. My fear is that I would not be able to do any more and would probably sell. The frustration comes from all the pests. Willie Adelgid killed off my hemlock. Gypsy moth has wiped out my white oaks, then onto my chestnut oaks, and finally many of my red oaks. My ash trees are mostly gone. Where are all these parasites coming from? It seems we're defenseless. How can a landowner maintain a healthy forest? I have 44 acres of forest and a 3-acre pond and a few acres of pasture. I've been managing it for 43 years. I'm now into a salvage plan. The other frustration is that the forest floor never freezes. I have to log in mud. So Paul, again, thanks for being honest and transparent. It's helpful. I think you're representative of other people probably on this call. Jeremy, maybe you want to speak to any of this? Any thoughts for him?
Sure. I don't think, Paul, there is any silver bullet on, I'll be
Mhm.
frank with you. I encounter this on a lot of my inspections, on, woodlots where the landowners have been working diligently and hard every year. It seems like the major change that I'm observing is that we can no longer say, hey, for the next 10 years or 20 or 30 years, I'm going to be working towards developing high quality saw logs of white oak. Or I'm going to say, I want to really stock my forest with high quality saw logs of white ash or something like that, because we have so many pathogens and so many tree pests and onward. My advice genuinely is to manage your forest from the perspective of diversity, biological diversity, vegetative diversity, and strongly consider the stewardship program. I think I encourage landowners that are in your demographic and beyond. I do think there's a big difference. I think the activity that you would do in your woodland in terms of treating non-native invasive species, working on a little bit of interplanting, trying to foster regeneration, whether it be artificially or naturally, it's a little bit more safe and a little bit less backbreaking than running a chainsaw and producing your 3+ cords every single year. So I think that would be my advice: diversity, and look into stewardship and have this conversation with your consultant forester, because that person, beyond you, that person probably knows your forest the second most intimately.
I think in general, the public does not understand the commitment of the landowner. And I really feel what Paul is writing here, physically and mentally, because as you age, and we're in exactly the same age group, um, you get tired. It's hard. The work is very, very hard. So I have found, fortunately, I have good equipment. And the main thing, one of the other things that I found, Paul, is that I try to focus on discrete projects that I can accomplish, as opposed to a multitude of projects that never get done. And it's very mentally stimulating to do that. And then you can complete that project. It's not, it doesn't always perfectly fit the plan, Jeremy. And I understand that. But the reality is that if you're doing invasives, then do it right and do the project, mark the area and get it done. But, when you're wandering around 40 acres like Paul is, it's a lot of land, and you can get taken off track every moment. And then a tree blows down and you're cutting that up for a week. And so, especially if you're a solo operator. So in any event, I hope that some of those folks who are listening who don't own land can get an appreciation of the amount of effort that landowners put in. And that's what this reflects to me.
Mhm. And I would also, just a couple points. Number one, there is funding available through the USDA that you can apply for to assist you, reimburse you towards these activities. As a consulting forester who also helps landowners implement their forestry plans, we go out and cut trees, apply herbicide, et cetera, et cetera. The funding is pretty good. So the reimbursement rates for certain activities are very good and would allow you to nearly pay for probably 60 to 80% of the cost of hiring a contractor for a certain practice. Okay, we're not talking about hiring a tree service to take a dead tree down that's hanging over your house. That's totally different ballgame. But when we're talking about a forest management activity like controlling Japanese barberry in the forest, in the interior of the forest, through the use of an herbicide or hand pulling or mechanical or some type of a forestry thinning project, their rates are pretty good, and you could help offset the cost of hiring a contractor. And the second thing is, Jeremy brought this up, is the stewardship plan, the stewardship rules. I always describe it like in the woodland management program, there's always a voice, or there should be a voice on your shoulder saying, how are you going to derive revenue from your forest? If you're under a woodland management plan, you are required to derive revenue from your forest through the sale of a product. So most of the time that's firewood, but that could be from saw timber or something else. The forest stewardship rules removed that voice. It's not there anymore saying, where's your income coming from? Where's your income coming from? So as a forester, I love that because it basically lets us deal with the forest more holistically and think about the forest and say, okay, what this year or next year, what would benefit and affect my forest positively? Would that be invasive species control? Would that be some tree planting? Would that be some tree thinning? But I might be able to just fell some of these trees, creating some vertical structure in the forest for wildlife habitat. These trees are going to biodegrade into this and create soil. I don't have a need for firewood, let's say. I don't need firewood to heat my home or whatever it might be. So stewardship let us kind of think a little bit differently about how we do our activities in the forest. So that's another more food for thought for conversations with your forester.
And do you see this question here for Kristen on failing to meet farmland assessment but don't have rollback? I think that might fall right into it's right, it's under anonymous at 736.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand what
I think that's what Kristen was talking about, that if you kept the use. So
yeah, as long as the use is there. Now this is another thing where I'm going to tell you to have a very open, honest conversation with your tax assessor about it. And maybe some assessors are harder on the rollbacks than I am, but as long as there's some use still there, but maybe it's just not quite enough, or you didn't quite hit that income requirement, or whatever, there's not going to be a rollback. A lot of times when people age out of farming or whatever, this is the conversation I have with them is, okay, I understand you're kind of opting out because physically you just can't do it anymore, but keep some activity so you don't get a change in use and a rollback is kind of the conversation I always have with them. Because I don't really think the intent of the rollback is to penalize someone who just maybe can't fully keep up with it anymore.
Right, but let's distinguish between rollback and tax rate. So you could still be subject to an increased tax rate for the current period.
Your assessment will go up.
Correct. So that I don't want someone to think that we didn't mean that, right?
Right.
So
no, you will lose
right.
farm assessment entirely, and your taxes going forward for current year and going forward will go up, but you won't receive that 2-year rollback, or at least
right. And I think that's going to depend much on the tax assessor, because
a lot. Yes. Some assessors will give a rollback for a portion of the land,
Yeah, exactly. But it just didn't want them to confuse it with what the tax rate was going to be in the current year, because that will be lost.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. This may be off subject. I don't think it is. I think it's a good question. 200 acres in West Milford. We've experienced ATV activities that have ruined many areas. Unusable. Can you share some approaches that can be taken? We closed off one end of the ATVs and have pictures of them riding through the mud. Are there currently fines with towns, counties, and state? That's probably a Jeremy question. I don't know if you have any thoughts for somebody like that.
There's a lot of different approaches I've heard about people taking. I mean, the very rudimentary basic thing I would say out of the chute is to ensure from a legal standpoint that your property boundaries are very well identified with no trespassing signs at minimum. And even if you do have a rock wall or a road that makes it seem distinguishable that you're going from one property and then onto your property in question, if you have a lot of trespass issues, make it abundantly clear. Depending on the size of the properties, I see some landowners meeting with a lot of success, allowing only certain people to be able to use their properties. For instance, woodland owners and the hunting conservation community tend to kind of dovetail very nicely with one another. It's a very common occurrence, and these woodland owners sometimes say, hey, maybe I will allow a small group of individuals, especially a small group of individuals who are also police officers in the township in question, hunt my property for a few years. And that is very successful in keeping the riffraff off of your property, the ATV use and stuff like that. That will be a recommendation. And then obviously the other recommendation is attempting to work with your local authorities on that too.
There also are some websites that these ATV riders rely upon to find locations. And in some of them, you can actually put a comment on there that this property is not open to the public, or you can make a note. And because they're using this application in order to find the properties to go on to. So
be present. So Jeremy just said that that's the best way to keep people off your property is be present and active on your property. And if you can't, get somebody to help you with that, like Jeremy was describing, a small hunting club, whatever it is. People don't trespass when they know they're going to run into somebody. If they are aware that people use the property, hunt the property, recreate on the property, they're not going to come on the property. So we've had issues on my family property on a corner of the property where we rarely ever go. But we've kind of stopped that, but it was exactly because they knew we didn't go back there. So, I mean, a year would go by and I would never walk that little corner of the property because it's across a stream, across a brook, I was like, but we had issues with dirt bikes and stuff coming on the property. So it was exactly that. And the minute I reposted it, I dropped a tree right across where they were coming across the boundary line, put up several posters and started to walk that area more. They never came back. So be present. Okay. There's a question, will woodlands be included in farmland preservation? That's a bigger conversation, I think.
We can say there is a bill pending to try to create that, but it's just at the moment it's just a pending bill.
Yep. This is a real kind of forestry question. What's the rule of thumb for tree thinning spacing? I've heard 10 feet to 20 feet. Jeremy, any thoughts? I mean, it's a very nuanced, there's a lot of nuance to that, to answer that question. Yeah.
Are we talking about spacing for afforestation when you're replanting, or are we talking about ideal spacing between mature trees grown in the forest?
Nothing
I'm not sure.
specific there. Yeah. So I think,
I really think it depends on objectives. It depends on
yeah.
the species, the shade tolerant nature of the species in question. But really your ultimate goals, the caliper, I would need more detail to answer that. I think, unfortunately.
Yep. Current cost to do a stewardship plan. Since I'm a private consultant, I can kind of just give you a ballpark. Every consultant, you know, there's no price list for all of us to follow. So it's based on a lot of different things. But I think safely I could say you're talking about a minimum of probably $1,500 for a plan, a forest stewardship plan on a 15-acre property and upwards from there. So let's see here. As an older woodland owner with 2 properties in the stewardship program, I'm concerned with what happens to my properties when I'm gone. I have no family members who share my passion for forest management. So I'll stop right there for a second. Tune in next month as we present on estate planning and what happens to my land. So that's a great question to pose next week. Continuing on, I contacted Salem County to see if they were interested in preserving my forest. They were not. I'm assuming it's because their priority is saving open farmland from housing or commercial development. My suggestion is for the state to come up with a way to permanently preserve. Okay.
There are things you can do. You can speak to private conservation organizations and work with them, particularly if your forest is a desirable connector to other forests that they have already preserved. But certainly I would reach out to the larger, more well-known ones, as well as those that are local to your town.
That's good. After the 10 years is up, is it necessary to have a totally new plan created, inclusive of the cost of creating plan? Jeremy?
Short answer, yes. You need to have a brand new 10-year plan with a new forest inventory. All of that legwork that's completed by the consultant forester. They have to get new quantitative data from the forest and pivot that data into the development of a new plan, whether or not your objectives have changed for the property. So yes.
So here's a good one. I think this is a great question because I think we can kind of just talk about all the nuances of that this question kind of poses. So I got 30 acres, got 3 lots. Do I need to apply for each individual lot? Can I use one lot in the plan? And I would flip it and say, can I have one plan for the 3 lots? So there's a lot of like details here. So Kristen, you want to start to kind of pull that apart, I guess, and then we can all jump in.
As long as they're contiguous, they can all be on one application. However, your application must in biggest bold underline I could possibly say, list all 3 lots. So yeah, you can do one application as long as they're contiguous, and not just contiguous, exact same legal ownership. So if you own one by yourself and then your significant owner or other owns one by their self, and then you own the third one combined, like that is not contiguous for farmland assessment purposes. So number one, most important thing, legal ownership on all 3 lots. Although in this case, each one, if assuming there were 10 acres each, if it was even, they could all qualify on their own. But you want to have same ownership. You can do them all on one application. Just please, please, please be sure you're listing each lot on the application. And then, yeah, they can pretty much go on one plan. That's fine too.
Yeah. And I think this may have been, the question may not have been asked correctly, but can I only use one lot for the plan? So if you own 3 lots and you only want to put 1 lot in a plan for some reason, then by all means, it just has to meet the minimum requirements of 5 acres or whatever it might be. So good question though. That comes up from time to time. We run into, actually, I would just say the law stating that the ownership needs to be identical from lot to lot to be considered contiguous. That's not a new thing. That's been in the law, but it's now being policed, or whatever you want to call it, more closely. The Division of Taxation is looking for that, and they're holding their assessors accountable to follow through with that. So for years, it was kind of like last name was fine. Now it's more like, nope, it's got to be husband and wife on every single lot, or wife on every single lot, whatever. Doesn't matter, it just has to match. So.
Yes, so the Division of Taxation is, well, it started during COVID, auditing all the farmland applications in the state. They started in Sussex County and then they stopped, and I think they're picking it up again. And that honestly is the number one thing they're looking for. When I got my reports back from the audit, that was the thing they were talking about in both my towns I got audited. So very important.
Another comment about private woodlands and kind of easements, the state, things like that. I don't know if we have a lot of answers to that question. So it's great ideas that there would be programs to preserve forested acres, and to somehow get paid for that land. But there are certain programs that work and fit, and there are some that don't. So yeah. Good one here. I'm currently enrolled for Woodland Assess. I'm thinking about switching to stewardship. What are the advantages? We've kind of talked about that a little bit, but maybe Jeremy just hit it again.
Sure. I would say the number one advantage is that you don't necessarily need to derive income from your woodland, so long as the property is entirely woodland and you don't have a mixed use property with some agriculture in it too. You wouldn't have to derive income. Now, that doesn't mean you don't necessarily need to not cut trees incrementally. Andy touched on that. There may be still an element of where it's appropriate and needed to do the right thing for the property. Perhaps certain elements and certain stands of the forest would benefit from thinning. Case in point, in the northern region, we have a lot of very densely stocked stands of red maple and black birch or sweet birch. And these birch trees, they tend to, based on forest density, they tend to spread a nectaria root rot disease amongst themselves. So really thinning would become essential to keep that forest stand healthy. However, income wouldn't need to be derived from that thinning activity, so that those trees, that material could very well be, there's a lot of things that could be done with them. They could be left on the mineral soil for biodegradation to turn back to soil. You could implement different forms of quality deer management, QDMA, where you hinge cut and you help promote maybe your white-tailed deer population or your ability to successfully hunt them. You could do just, the sky becomes the limit in terms of the activities you could choose from. And again, like we talked about before, you could do wildlife management, you could do non-native invasive species control, you could focus on enhancing the stock of your forest or interplanting, artificial regeneration, even afforestation. You could have a small field that currently has no trees in it. And you could say, hey, by the end of this 10-year plan, this small field is going to be a forest. So let's say I have 10 acres currently of forest coming into this program, 2 acres of just meadow field, whatever it might be. But I want this plan to say it's a full 12 acres. And I want my application to be entirely non-appurtenant woodland. You could commit that 2 acres to becoming a forest with a 10% stocking of or 10% canopy closure by the end of that 10-year period, and that 2 acres would count as woodland too. So there's a lot of benefits, and you get a lot more detail in terms of the information you get in the plan itself, threatened and endangered species, information about carbon sequestration, information about cultural resources, even silvopasture and estate planning. So just a more robust plan in general, and a lot more freedom in terms of what you could do within the plan.
No mowing. What about invasive species like roses? Yeah, just to clarify the mowing, Jeremy, we were differentiating between mowing with like a yard you would mow weekly or bi-weekly, and maybe brush hogging it maybe once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, even, to minimize kind of the issues you might be having with invasive species. So I was with a customer the other day. We were talking about mowing. He has a lot of olive and it resprouts. And so we were talking about the idea of multiple mowings to try to exhaust kind of the sugars and this plant, maybe we could kill it by just mowing it multiple times versus using an herbicide. So if you have a reasoning, a rationale behind your mowing, Jeremy and the State Forest Service guys are going to listen to that rationale. And if it makes sense, they're going to go with you there and say, great idea. But if they show up and you're mowing it and it looks like a park, it's pretty obvious that it's not forestry, right? It's not forest management. You just created a park that looks really cool, and it does look really cool. But it has no future forest, growing underneath it. So, our town is a 7-acre preserve, conservation easement, DPW is mowing it. Are there any standards for us to cite? Benefits of having a no-mow zone? We'd like to create a wildflower meadow. So I don't really know what to say to that question.
And I think that's a very local issue,
Yeah.
a town issue.
Yep. Someone looking for a resource on forest health. Jeremy, any thoughts? A website or a book?
Yeah, I mean, currently, Department of Ag has been a good resource for forest health related issues, tree pests and diseases and things like that. And even a better resource lately has been Rutgers Cooperative Extension has been a really good resource. When people have a pathogen or a disease in their forest and I can't identify it when I'm on an inspection, I recommend they send it out to Rutgers for identification. And maybe even some assistance with how you could go about treating that too.
Great. If I pay someone to cut firewood and they sell it, does that income count? I would say, I'll let Kristen answer this, but it's very similar to a relationship with a farmer. If you have a hay field and a farmer comes and cuts the hay, he can give you a receipt for the value of the hay that he removed from your property. And you can submit that letter, a signed letter from the farmer with your application. And I think, Kristen, you would say that suffices from your viewpoint.
Yeah,
so
it's totally fine. You just want to make sure they're selling the firewood and they're not selling, some people do those really cool carvings or whatever. The sale of the carving doesn't count, just has to be the raw product of the land. Doesn't matter who sells it as long as it's coming from your land.
Good. Paul, again, I filed an extension for my tax return this year. If it's not done by August, am I okay with my application? Kristen, this is probably for you, but I think there was some historic confusion that a lot of assessors were requiring Schedule Fs or tax returns from the previous year, and that's nowhere really in the law that has to be submitted. It can be a receipt, right? So filing your taxes or tax return is really irrelevant. If you have a receipt or canceled check or something like that, that's sufficient for
Right. Before the gross sales form was implemented, and I feel that really hasn't been around that long, like maybe since 2018.
Yeah.
2017. Like it's really is relatively new.
Yeah.
Before that, it was required to submit some sort of proof of income. A lot of people would submit the income tax return or like copies of paper receipts or whatever, the letter from the guy that cut your hay or your firewood or but actually, the income the assessor really is looking for is current year. So your tax return is last year. We really want to know what you're going to earn currently in 2024. What are you going to earn in 2024 to qualify for 2025? That tax return document is great as supportive evidence that, yes, you have a history of making the income you're saying you're going to earn. But really what you need to be reporting, and I know the timing is weird because you got to have this thing in by August 1st, but you're still like maybe in the prime of your income season, like making season, or if you have Christmas trees, you're not making the income for another 6 months or 4 months from August. But it's really this year's income that you need to be reporting or your anticipated income. And when you're signing the gross sales form that's required, that a lot of people still are not including with their application. So make sure you do. You are signing a certification that what you're stating is your best estimate of what you anticipate to earn this year. So yeah, it's fine. The short answer is yes, it's fine not to submit that with your application.
Okay, I need to jump to the chat, but let me hit this one. Can a woodland plan change to a stewardship plan? Simple answer is yes. But Jeremy, the stewardship plan potentially may require more data than what you have in your current woodland management plan. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the consultant forester that you're working with, they may be amenable to upgrading an existing woodland management plan based on the inventory they collected preemptively at the beginning of the plan. They may be willing to upgrade your plan to a stewardship plan for a fee, whatever that fee may be. But oftentimes, because there is such an increased quantity of raw data required for a stewardship plan, that some consultant foresters may advise you, hey, let's just start from scratch. So it's a property by property, forester by forester kind of basis.
Another one of the question Q&A here, and then I'm going to get to the chat. If a buyer doesn't continue use, who pays rollback?
Yes, so
Kristen?
it really would serve everyone best if everyone involved in the transaction, and the buyer is going to be the one that knows that they don't plan to continue. So really, it's in their best interest to reach out to the tax assessor and get an estimate, if the tax rate for the current year has not already been struck, an estimate of what that rollback is going to be. So that way the seller could potentially contribute to that, but really it's the buyer choosing not to contribute or to continue. So it does fall on the buyer, but there have been times where I've seen escrows held at closing so that the seller contributes to the rollback. But
It's important to discuss with your attorney
attorney,
at the
realtor,
time of
everybody.
sale. You should be just assessing, as bad term, you should be looking into whether the filings are all up to date on the property as a buyer. Did the seller file on time on August 1st? Have there been any issues with the assessor? And then specific language in the agreement, who's responsible for rollback taxes?
All right, I'm going to jump to the chat because there's quite a few over here. Explain difference between income required plan and no income. We've kind of talked about that. That's the stewardship versus the woodland management plan. Also, why is there any tax on acres under a forest management plan? The taxes are pretty darn low on woodland acres, right? What is it, $1,000 an acre, Kristen, roughly?
The taxes?
The assessed value, sorry. So the taxes are like what?
On a woodland property, it's not even that high. It's well, maybe. I'd have to look it up. We get an updated chart every year from the Division of Taxation that tells us based on soil class
Right.
what to assess the property. It's not something that the assessor comes up with on our own. We have to follow the chart. It gets updated annually, and it's really the woodlands are the lowest in value.
Mm-hmm. With the thinking, okay, converting an area under trees. Okay, here we go. Converting an area under trees from invasive overgrowth to mowing constantly in the interim, then preparing for a meadow under the trees. Is that going on the woodland or the agriculture side as a native meadow? Thank you.
I'll tell you, Andy, a native meadow is not going to qualify on the agricultural side. It has to generate income. So that's just an open field in essence, right, Andy?
Yeah, those acres are always like really, they have no home on a farmland application. Like they're not being managed for a product. Now, I would make an argument with an assessor, and I'm just speaking as a consultant who works for landowners. If you are engaged in a program with the USDA, let's say, about a native meadow restoration, wildlife habitat, if you can justify what you're doing and why, I think an assessor would listen to that conversation. If
Would that have to be in your plan though, Andy?
Something like that, potentially, yeah. But I know for Kristen, it's shaky ground. So
yeah, well, number one, it has to be paired with something that is driving income. Can't just be this meadow. So Andy, I think last year brought this up to me. And then one other forester that I did a site inspection with for this specific reason, brought it up to me. And at the end of the day, in my mind as an assessor, now this is going to be extremely assessor specific.
Yeah.
There's no case law that covers any of this stuff. So you really need to have a conversation with your assessor. But at the end of the day, my opinion has become, after years of doing this and conversations, is that it's really not that different than a pertinent land. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that that's what it should be, on my own, or I guess permanent pat. I don't know. I don't know. But it's kind of pertinent, right? As long as it's paired with something, it has to be paired with something else, because you have to have income coming from somewhere, unless you have the forest stewardship plan.
Yeah, but it's also scale, Kristen. So like if you have a 20-acre property and you have 18 acres in a forestry plan, and you have a 3/4 acre meadow you're mowing over here and a 1/2 acre over here, and it's kind of somewhat incorporated into woodlands, like I think that's very different than I'm seasonally mowing a 20-acre field and that's all I have. Like those are different things.
Yep, that first example is where I would call the meadow pertinent. Even though it's not woodlands or wetlands, that's kind of where I've landed. It's in support of the rest of the forest. It's in support of the land. It does help pollinators. Like there's benefits to that.
Right.
Whereas the 20-acre just meadow, there's no income. So that can't qualify. But yeah.
But if you set up
definitely case by case, and you have to really look at the property and get your assessor out there to kind of hear you out.
But if you set up a bee yard with multiple beehives and you begin managing that meadow for pollinators,
perfect.
Then you have a good conversation with the tax assessor and it works.
Yeah. So, in fact, in order to get the bees to qualify, you need to be doing that.
Right.
You need to be making an attempt to keep the bees on the property. So yeah, I mean, that would be ideal.
Rich, you want to read that disclaimer again for the advice we're giving?
Well, you're not giving any advice. You're just having a conversation amongst yourselves.
All right, very good.
But everybody understands, I believe, that this is not specific to any one property. We are trying to respond generally to the questions.
If you have more than 5 acres or only 5 acres, can you have a combination of forest land and hay? Is there a minimum for forest versus hay, other agriculture? Go ahead, Kristen.
I answered it in the chat for her. Yes, you can. As long as you're meeting that 5 acre minimum, it doesn't matter if it's an acre of hay, 4 acres of woodlands, an acre of woodlands, although that I think probably makes the forest guys here cringe, because that's a hard plan to write, hard to manage 1 acre of woodlands over 10 years, but it can be done. 4 acres of hay, that's all fine. You just need to meet that 5 acre minimum, and your income requirement.
But that 4 acres of hay would have to produce it at the agricultural threshold of
$1,000. Yes.
Right. So you don't get the benefit of the forest threshold. You get
It's really, you're just doing it to get, I hate to say it, you're just doing it to get the benefit of farm assessment for the hay, just to get you over that 5 acre threshold.
There's an interesting question, Andy, back in the Q&A, but it's really not, I don't know that we can answer it, but I think it's starting to speak very strongly about the subject of the aging ownership, the last question in the Q&A. And I just see this as a theme coming through from a lot of people, that they're facing the realities of time and age, and the challenges of the forest are just increasing every year, as Jeremy described, all the disease and invasives, and it's truly an issue that we have to keep cognizant of, I think, as a group. And I'm constantly striving to figure out what we can do to try to help the group that's aging still continue to do good work in the forest. So anyway, sorry, Andy, I got on a soapbox, but
no, that's good. I mean, and his question was dealing with like accessibility issues as well.
Accessibility issues to property and financial resources
Mhm.
And we know it's very interesting because, and I'm digressing a bit, but there's so much talk about forests these days, but there's not talk about helping forest landowners.
Mhm.
And
Yep. Yep. We're about out of time here, but question.
we usually
Kristen,
run over in the Q&A, Andy.
okay. Kristen, I think this might be for you, and I don't remember what the law supports. Can you average income from a timber harvest over a number of years? Do you have a rule of thumb you use? I know there are assessors who are all over the map on this, but what's the law say or support you in doing?
Doesn't really. So you really need to talk to your assessor about it. I'm personally okay with it going for like the 3 years or what, 3 years. But I think there's an argument to make if someone was doing now they specifically are stating timber. Now, from my nice walkthrough of your property, Andy, the timber is when you're like not firewood.
Right.
The trees. Like, so it's taken years and years, maybe decades to get to the point where you can do this huge timber harvest that you're going to make a lot of money on. I think an open conversation with the assessor saying, like, listen, this is a huge harvest. I think there's an argument to let that, as long as it's enough money, go for the full 10 years of the plan, really. I think it really depends. Also, probably on the size of the land. So no, I don't think it's a simple answer. I think it's very property specific and also, unfortunately, assessor specific.
But then there's
Definitely
activity.
it's very assessor specific in my experience. And it may also involve accountants if you're doing a significant harvest and what you can amortize from a gap perspective. So I'm not sure that would govern in this case, but I think that it has an interplay in the conversation. But I agree, you should speak to your assessor. Jeremy, you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I agree with everything that's being said from a income deriving perspective. The Forest Service kind of looks at these commercial timber sales, and it really they don't generate a ton of revenue, but enough revenue to easily carry forward 2 years beyond the actual activity, giving you a total of 3 years of income derived. However, the rules, there's two parts of farmland assessment. There is the income requirement and then the need to remain actively devoted.
Yes.
Once we start getting beyond that 3rd year, I want to see new activity out in the forest, even if that activity is taking place in the locations where the timber harvest occurred. Maybe there's additional material, topwood that could be salvaged out. Maybe there's some invasive control. Maybe there is a little bit of afforestation or interplanting. But once, there's two different things, right? You have to be actively devoted and you have to derive income. So if we talked about also in the very beginning that there is a 10-year activity schedule in the plans, and the plans, prescribe every year what's going to be done in that forest. I'm not going to, nor will any of the other regional foresters throughout the state, approve a plan that doesn't show a new activity coming into from out of year 3 and into year 4. So there will be a need to do something come year 4. It doesn't need to necessarily be income deriving. I leave that up to taxation.
Yeah, so I was actually just going to jump in and say the same thing. Like, we're talking specifically about stretching the income to meet that requirement, but your plan should have that in place. So if you're doing a harvest that's big enough to span several years, I would still want to see activity yearly. Just do something else. Clear your invasive species, do whatever for the health of the forest, versus it doesn't have to be income producing activity, but you still need to be actively working the land and doing what you can. But spreading the income out, it's unfortunately very specific to your property and then also the assessor. And I don't think it's unreasonable.
Okay, so Andy, let's try to wrap up with the next couple of questions. I think there's a good one for you in there. My previous forester moved on and I found it very difficult to locate a new person. Almost all were not accepting new clients. Any suggestions?
It's tough. I don't have a lot of suggestions for you. If you're in the northern part of the state, Sussex, Warren, Passaic, Morris, you're welcome to give us a call. We might be able to help you out. But if you're in the central part or the south, I know most folks are pretty full. Pretty full. So yeah, just keep trying. I don't know what else to tell you. You got to find somebody and encourage young people to go into this profession. So
I would add to that, Andy, too, there's a time of year that becomes more challenging too to find
yeah,
improved forester, right?
well,
And so, you keep the dialogue open, know if your forester is going to retire or if you're going to part ways from that relationship. And as we've talked about, the filing deadline for farmland assessment is every August 1st. So I
mhm.
would say between like June 15th and August 1st, it's going to be very difficult to pin down a forester for a new property to them. So think about this in the autumn months through the winter and the spring, and you may meet with a lot more success.
Yeah, approaching a person who's under stress is not a good idea. So let them get through the filing period and they'll probably be more receptive to conversation. So does anybody have any wrap-up thoughts? Would each of you like to give a little wrap-up?
My wrap up is really just to have, I keep saying over and over, an open conversation with your tax assessor. We're not mean people. We want to work with you. We want to understand your property. We want you to be farmland assessed if as long as you qualify. It's a program that's in place for a reason. And you got to help us help you qualify for it and make sure we understand exactly what's going on at your property at all times.
Yeah, I was going to say this earlier when I was presenting, but uh I kind of feel like with the forestry side of things, there's actually like four legs to the stool. So you have a landowner, you have a consulting forester, you have a state forester, and you have a tax assessor. So there's like four parties that are involved. You can look at that like, man, this is really complicated. But all it tells me is that you need to communicate. You need to have a good relationship with your forester. You need to have a good relationship with your tax assessor, and you need to have, you may not have this ongoing relationship with Jeremy at the state, but you'll have some type of relationship. He's accessible via phone and via email. So I think it's important to remember that there's multiple parties involved. Unlike if you're just farm assessed through a hayfield, it's just you and the tax assessor and maybe a farmer. But it's a much simpler kind of equation. But in forest with a forested property, it's a little more complicated. There's a few more folks involved. So I think we've heard tonight multiple times: communicate, communicate, communicate.
Jeremy, anything?
My only addition, and I've heard this over and over again, even from the Forestry Association, your organization, and I love it, it is to plan your work and work your plan. Be involved with that planning process as a woodland owner. Don't expect, although they can provide it for you, know what you want over the course of 10 years in a given stewardship or woodland management plan. Know what you want your overarching goals to be, and be prepared for your first meeting with your consultant forester, because they're likely going to ask you that exact question. They're going to guide you to be able to become farmland assessed, but ultimately they want to sculpt and write a plan that is going to cater to what your property objectives actually are. So be involved. And Andy also brought up the fact that there is yet another entity that's involved with woodland owners and beyond, and that's the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have a program called the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and there is substantial funds available to help offset land developments and possibly even offset the cost of implementing certain prescribed activities on your property. So as a woodland owner, look into them, regardless of it being something your forester will do on your behalf. Some do, some don't. So look into those other opportunities too, like NRCS.
The other thing that I would wrap up with is that I notice in the questions, a lot of things are about like me and my property. People feel very alone. And so one of the functions that we as an organization, the New Jersey Forestry Association provides is a sort of a community. And we have resources of information. We have backyard forestry. We have walks in the woods. And if you participate in these things, you can learn a lot just from the people you sit with and chat with and hear from, like Andy and Jeremy and Kristen. And we've had, I don't know, 30 some odd presenters for backyard forestry. And, you know, to me, it's being part of the community is very energizing in taking care of your property. You're something much larger than just yourself. And so keep that in mind.
It's good.
So I thank the presenters very, very much. You did a great job. You got a lot of great questions, and you seem to keep the audience engaged for quite a bit of time. So that's really good. And I thank you for participating.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Glad to be here, Rich. Thank you. Thanks for everybody attending. It was a great meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
a good night, everyone.
See y'all.